It's a pleasure to welcome you all here. So I'm Manon Aubry. I'm the co-chair of the Left Group here in the European Parliament. I used to work for the NGO Oxfam as a disclaimer before being elected here in the European Parliament. So I still consider myself as an activist, and I should say how happy I am to see so many activists actually in the room. And I wish you would come here a little bit more often, and I think I will think a little bit less on my own. It's the third and last day of the conference, and given the quality of all of the previous sessions, I doubt that I need to emphasize why it is necessary to switch from a growth-driven economic framework to one beyond growth. But it's not the least of the task that is waiting for us today. Find out how to build a post-growth macroeconomic governance framework. So I know that from the title you might think, wow, okay, what are we going to dive in today? But you'll see that it's very key for our post-growth economy. It's dealing with concrete issues that we're discussing here in the European Parliament that will be key in the next few months with the debate around the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact. The name says it all, but I will get back to it. I'll start with what I heard 2 days ago. I have to say, I was pleased to hear President von der Leyen saying on Monday that the growth model is obsolete. Usually, when I say that in this hemicycle, well, I don't have that much echo, I should say, and usually it doesn't please so much of my colleagues sitting on that side of the hemicycle. So I can say that you should come here more often, because your presence here probably already had a lot of impact, maybe even more than sometimes we can have as members of European Parliament. So I wanted to thank you all, because it's already a big move, at least in the words. But as the saying goes, there is no love. There are only proofs of love. And so far, the proofs on the EU side are all directed to economic growth. That remains the prism through which the EU designs and assesses every single policy. Because up till now, EU's institutions and policies have been all about growth. It's currently everywhere in the European treaties and European policies. It's in the European fiscal rules, in the mandate of the European Central Bank, the European Green Deal, the recovery plan. The European Commission even has an entire and powerful Directorate General for Growth. They don't have a Directorate General for the well-being, for example. That can be a suggestion that we can pass along to Ursula von der Leyen. Growth is everywhere because we've been told it's everything. The curve to take, the path to follow, the goal to achieve. It's the silver bullet in pretty much every single legislation that goes through this institution and in every corner of national policy making. But this silver bullet might eventually kill us. The last decades have shown us that none of the things that really matter seems enough to sacrifice when it comes to fostering economic growth. Public services, public infrastructures and investment, social security, solidarity, workers' rights and fair wages, common goods, environmental protection, all of this have been considered as a mere variable to achieve economic growth. At the same time, tax competition has been encouraged as the European level and public revenues fell in an endless race to the bottom, leading to even more austerity. Let me emphasize the absolute absurdity of this reasoning. We're told that growth will bring us prosperity and well-being in the future, but for that, they dismantle the very things that bring us prosperity and well-being in the present. And since growth never comes back, or never enough to their eyes, we're told we should keep digging forever for it and undermining what keeps us together as a society. This is a vicious circle that we need to get out. That being said, the crisis that we have faced forced EU institutions to put on hold some of the key dogmas. The crisis, being the pandemic, being the energy crisis, being the climate crisis, have questions neoliberal dogma. Even in this House, things are changing. I've seen Philippe that just arrived, and I take this opportunity to thank Philippe. It's been, I'm a new member of the European Parliament since this mandate, and there are people who've shown the way some time ago. So thanks, Philippe, for showing the way, because it's also with the collaboration of all left groups that we reach that point. But now, things have been shaken up. It's obvious that mitigating the impact of lockdowns would have been impossible without public intervention and social security nets. Still, fighting COVID would have been much easier if public hospitals had been properly funded. Keeping energy prices low and limiting inflation would have been much easier with energy considered as a common good that does not have to abide by the laws of competition. And similarly, coping with the present and coming consequences of climate catastrophe will be easier if we have fiscal and policy space to carry out massive investments in mitigation and adaptation, rather than waiting for the private sector to decide whether it's in their interest or not. Over the last few months, as a result of this context, even the European Commission has questioned its own dogmas that are at the root of the European Union policies, which are, I have to say, real cultural victories for us who have been challenging those rules for quite some time now. The energy market is being revised. The state aid rules have been adapted. And what interests us for today's session, the Growth and Stability Pact has been suspended for now 3 years, and everyone now agrees that it was for the best. This pact, the Growth and Stability Pact, is the cornerstone of the EU economic governance and coordination, framing the budgetary rules, how much countries can spend, where they should spend into, and what happens if they spend too much. Beyond that acronym that is not so much popular, it's actually key to understand nowadays economic policies. It's also one of the main tools to promote growth-related policies. The name says it all. Growth and Stability Pact. I wish of the day we'll have the well-being and ecological pact, the fight inequalities and ecological pact. But this is not what we have today. It's very clear from the name, and member states' proposed reforms are therefore assessed by the European Commission as part of the European semester, precisely to stimulate growth, and the European Commission makes recommendations in that direction. The objectives that are set in the Growth and Stability Pact, I'm sure you're all familiar with them. 3% deficit rule, 60% debt rule, equally never make sense. I've hardly found an economist, even among neoliberal economists, I've hardly found any defending why they choose that specific number. Why is it 3% deficit? Why not 2%? Why not 4% deficit? And we all know that there's no specific justification, in particular in the post-growth world. And on top, those rules are nowadays totally unrealistic. The average deficit in the Eurozone is 4.7%, and the average debt is 91.6% of GDP, very far from the 3% and 60%. And guess what? None of the EU states have collapsed. Yes, it's possible to go beyond the 3% deficit rule and the 60% debt rule. The EU is now at a crossroads. Asking member states to respect the targets, we all know it, would mean firing millions of public servants or killing social security system. Is it really what they want? Do they really want to reintroduce those rules with the consequences that we know? As usual, the debate will be go back to business as usual or shift to a post-growth economic model. And as usual again, the European Commission say, this time we have understood, with this sense of gravity that Ursula von der Leyen can rightly have. Yes, this time we have understood. Everything is going to change, we'll fix it. Well, look at the reform of the economic governance framework that the European Commission has proposed a couple of weeks ago. For me, this is really not up to what is at stake. Yes, they will introduce more flexibility, so the states will have a bit more time to obey by those rules. But keeping the same outdated targets of 3% deficit rule and 60% debt. And even more, introducing more sanctions for member states that are deviating from those rules. And keeping the objective of growth. But yes, covering it with adjectives like inclusive and sustainable, because growth can be inclusive and sustainable. You've all heard yesterday Vice President Dombrovskis of the European Commission saying again and speaking again about fair and sustainable growth. This reminds me of a quote from an American economist, Kenneth Boulding, who said, "Anyone who believes that exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist." Maybe we can add that they can be a European commissioner. Which brings us to the key questions of today's session with our panelists. Can there really be a so-called sustainable and inclusive growth? Do we want to go back to business as usual or to shift to a post-growth economic model? And if yes, how can the macroeconomic framework can be a tool for this? What are the alternative indicators that we should use to shift to a post-growth economic model? It's clear that we won't be able to face the two main challenges of our time, climate crisis and social inequalities, unless we do not set radically new orientations and new economic rules. This is the objective of our discussion today. Because, in the end, I want to leave you with that question. What is the point of having a balanced budget, of having a 60% debt rule and 3% deficit rule on a dead planet? You probably all know that famous quote, when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish caught, the last river poisoned, only then we will realize that one cannot eat money. And maybe we should add now, here from the European Parliament, that only then we realize that one cannot eat growth. Thank you very much.